The March 26th, 2012 meeting of the Agenda Charter Committee will now come to order. Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Chairwoman Boyce?
I'm here.
Mr. Esposito? Here. Mr. Howland? Here. Ms. Cayley? Here. Mr. McCann?
Here.
Is there anybody here to speak into the public forum?
There's not.
Okay. If not, the public, we have a hand in the back. Mr. Gregory? Would you please come forward, state your name for the record, and give us your address as well, please? Thank you.
My name is Thomas Gregory, and I use a post office box if you want to mail anything to me. 14662, Rochester, New York, 14614. And I'd like to speak just quickly to the two provisions, or the two intros that are brought forth by Mr. Patterson and Mr. Baroth. I've looked them over. I'm not a lawyer, but I think the language, number one, isn't going to work because the way that they were written, they would have the Citizens Commission making a determination that's already set by judiciary law. That means, in other words, you want to have this commission say if the salary increase would be okay for the district attorney. Can't do. It's already in judiciary law. You can't preclude that. That law is in effect. And I think the same thing applies for the sheriff. The sheriff's salary is set by local law. Even though it was a budgetary item, it's still local law. And if you look at the language of the charter, in my opinion, because I'm not a lawyer, it says you can't do it. You don't need this commission if the commission has no powers. The other thing too is when you start looking at law, the way it's interpreted, which I read a lot of case law, these citizen commissions are basically advisory in nature. They shouldn't and they must not have any type of power, in my opinion, that precludes or actually supersedes the power of this legislature. This legislative body has got the discretion to fix the salaries and wages of any officer, of course, subject to the approval of the administration, who can veto, but you can also override. So the absolute power, actually, I think they call it plenary power or something like that, really starts with you. But the other thing, too, is that when you look at the charter language itself, the charter language itself seems to be established as it applies to you, because you can't fix your own salary. Somebody's got to give you some advice. And there's a lot of case law that says that's the way it's supposed to be. I think these are things you have to look at. Now, I'd like to just quickly jump to the study that you were given and just mention something about, I think it's pretty inclusive. During the sheriff deserves the money. I think that was the final conclusion. And in my studies of the other budgets, I was looking at a lot of other salaries we pay, one of them being our county clerk. This woman, or that position, is grossly underpaid. Now, at the last legislative meeting, we heard a lot of talk about our other obligations to the county. But I want to point out to this legislative body that these officers are a revenue-generating source for the county of Monroe. And if we want to retain good officers and also reward them appropriately for the revenues they bring into this county, I don't think we'd be remiss in continuing to pay people to give them that independence, and also I think it's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Maybe you should go to law school. You did that quite well. Thank you. Can we now approve the minutes for the February Agenda Charter meeting? If you have any corrections or anything that you want to change, please see the clerk before the end of the day. So we'll approve those minutes. We'll go to new business. I'm going to take one of our agenda items out of order tonight at the request of the administration. Item number?
Referral 12-113, enact a local.
Moved by Mr. McCann, second by Mr. Howland. Any questions? Mr. Esposito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, just bear with me for 1 minute. I was expecting to do this last.
Nice.
If I could just ask through you to the administration, just for a little more justification about this change than is written in the referral from the administration.
Can you please identify yourself?
My name is Russell Rakowski. I'm with the Monroe County Environmental Services, and I'm also the staff liaison to the County Recycling Advisory Committee. This is a committee. This committee was set up under the solid waste and reuse law, recycling law, over 20 years ago. It's a group of 15 members, and their purpose is to assist and advise the county on the recycling law. 20 years ago, there were a lot of new things that were happening and changes that have come over the 20 years. At the time, this law is, there's 15 members on this committee, and it's made up of a cross-section of the community. And at the time, the Monroe County Refuse Haulers Association was an active organization. And at the time, the Monroe County Refuse Haulers was an active organization, and it's come to our attention that this organization has not met. That was confirmed with two of the members through their legal counsel. So this is actually going to be, the proposed language is to allow someone that collects refuse and recycling here in Monroe County and has an office here in Monroe County.
Thank you very much. And just to be clear through you, Madam Chair, this just affects the composition of the appointments from the county executive. There's still appointments from this body and others to the 15-member panel. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, the language that states that this must be a waste hauler with offices and collection services within Monroe County, maybe through you, Madam Chair, just explain why that language was chosen. Was that the criteria to be a member of the previously active Waste Haulers Association?
I don't know.
Madam Chair, we don't have the answer to that right now, but we'll get that for you. I would hazard a guess that that is the case, but this particular group, which was a former organization of which all of the waste haulers were represented on, is no longer around. It's defunct, and so I believe that these would be the same people that constituted that previous organization, but I'll confirm that for you.
That'd be great. And some confirmation before we'll let you would be helpful. I just want to make sure that with the with offices part, I want to make sure we're allowing anyone who's a waste hauler that provides service in Monroe County to be eligible, regardless of whether or not where they're based or where they might have administrative functions, obviously, as the county executives pick, but I'd hope we wouldn't want to limit their pool of selecting the haulers that serve our area. So thank you very much for that follow-up. I believe those are all my questions for now, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Esposito. Any other questions? Ms. Caley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the administration, I just had a couple quick questions about the committee itself. Are their meetings open to the public and announced?
Through the chair, please.
Through the chair, yes, the meetings are open to the public. They are held 10 months out of the year with the exception of July and August.
Thank you. And the second part of that, are they announced or is a general schedule announced? You actually answered my other second question, but how does the public know?
Through the chair, please.
There's an agenda that is, they meet on a routine basis the second Thursday of the month. Through
Thank
the
you.
chair, excuse me.
Just one thing, just before the committee meeting, I did get a copy of the advisory committee as it stands now. It seems to be quite dated, but we can make that available through the clerk's office. Any further questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed?
Referral 12-110, providing accountability for the salaries of Monroe County elected officials.
Moved by Ms. Callie, seconded by Mr. Esposito. I believe this is Mr. Patterson's. Mr. Patterson is the maker of the referral. Would you like to speak to this? You're welcome.
Thank you all for allowing me to address my referral calling for accountability for salaries of Monroe County elected officials. As you all know, the county charter calls for a compensation policy commission to be formed to make recommendations of compensation of elected officials and some appointed county officials. It is important for there to be an accountable system. It's important for there to be an accountable system when elected county officials see an increase in salaries. As public servants, we must strive to make these processes as open and as transparent as possible. These are basic points of good government. The taxpayers of Monroe County elected us to represent their interests and to act on their behalf. Any actions we take or fail to take that leave the people with the belief that we place our friends' interests above their interests undermines the people's faith in government and this body. It's our responsibility to use the people's tax dollars in an open and transparent manner. It's our responsibility to remember that we must take this responsibility as a sacred trust. Voting for my referral fulfills this trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Is there any further questions with regards to the referral or comments? Ms. Callie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I truly hope that this referral is approved today so that it can come to the floor of the full legislature for discussion. And I wanted to point out that the use of the Compensation Policy Commission, their process is for recommendation only. It's not setting policy. It is just for recommendation. And certainly if this body felt going further along with salary increases, decreases, or freezing points, that it is within the full purview or legal purview of the legislature to do this, and nothing recommended by the Compensation Policy Commission at this point forward would be set in stone. It is a recommendation only, and therefore I would ask that we approve this and take it to the full ledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Mr. Esposito.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask to you or through you, I'm not exactly sure who would be the best person to answer this question, but how to find out the makeup of the current Compensation Policy Commission?
Well, you know, Mr. Esposito, as much as I'd like to have you ask the administration that, I think that, you know, possibly that I don't know if they're going to be prepared at this time. Maybe they can get that for you, but
That would be fine, and even if it's after this committee meeting, that would be appreciated.
I think we want to be clear that when our legislators make up these referrals, that they do their research beforehand. I mean, I'm just cautioning, you know, would have been probably a good thing to have that, you know, looked at. But Mr. Halford, do you have that information at this time? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and I certainly appreciate that sentiment. I'd also, you know, hope that we can use these committee meetings as work sessions to better inform ourselves before we take votes on these things. Mm-hmm. I just think it's important to know if one exists in light of recent pay raises that were passed, to know if it ever met about that particular pay raise or any discussion about them. Mm-hmm. But that we can find out later. That's not necessarily pertinent to today's vote. But what is pertinent, and that I did want to raise, is that if you look at the section of the charter when the Compensation Policy Commission was formed in 1984, it's extremely clear that the intent of this legislation was to set up a commission to recommend pay raises to this legislative body, not to have this legislative body or any other entity arbitrarily perform pay raises. And the referral that we have before us just clarifies the language to ensure what I believe was the intent when this was originally created, to have a commission that exists for the sole reason of making recommendations about pay increases, that those recommendations be met, or that committee meets and makes those recommendations before any action is taken by this body. I think this is an extraordinarily prudent referral to ensure that process is followed properly, to ensure the proper amount of transparency and accountability and all the things that we hopefully we all want when dealing with things like pay increases or any expenditure of taxpayer dollars. I think there was a reason why this commission was established, and this referral today just makes sure that it will be utilized and not off to the side, inactive, and not meeting when the discussions of pay raises happen. So for that reason, I think this referral is appropriate. I'd certainly encourage my colleagues in this committee to vote in favor of it so that going forward, any pay raises in the future utilize this commission, which was established nearly 3 decades ago for this purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Esposito. Anything further? We'll vote on the referral. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. No as well.
Okay. 2-3 fails. All right. Referral 12-111, requiring the disclosure of pay raises to Monroe County elected officials.
Moved by Ms. Kelly. Second by Mr. Esposito. Any comments? Mr. Baroff, I'll recognize you at this time for making the, being the author of the referral. Apologize.
Thank you so much. In fact, I would indeed want to thank you for allowing me to speak to this referral. I appreciate the honor.
Of course. Yep.
I just want to start and assure anyone who might be in the room that, in fact, there is a clause within the charter that assures that this language would not, in fact, conflict with would not allow for the potential for conflict with state laws or regulations. This referral has a simple and common sense purpose, and that is to require a basic level of accountability and transparency to the governmental process. It's something that we do all the time. And as elected officials, all of us in this room, I'm very sure that we're all conscious of this trust and duty placed in us by our constituents. By speaking with everyone pretty much at least once, twice, 3, 4 times a month, I know we know that. And this is the case regardless of who our constituents happen to be, that the well-to-do, struggling with 3 jobs, the urban, rural, Democratic, Republican. We all have that expectation, and they have that of us too. Doesn't matter who we are. All the citizens of our great county, and this is a great county, expect openness and frankness from their government, particularly around issues of money and their elected officials. There is a reason why the Stock Act was recently passed with a massive bipartisan support by the United States Congress. There's a reason why elected officials are routinely expected to disclose their financials annually. The citizens, the taxpayers, expect us to do the honorable thing, to be open and timely in our decisions. It is when we do not, even for the most benign reasons, that our constituents distrust not just us as elected officials, but government in general. In fact, they get discouraged by democracy in general. And I'm sure everyone in this room would agree that causing our citizens of the Monroe County, Democrat and Republican alike, to feel shock and outrage is not a good thing, even if the intention was perfectly benign. And for this reason, I introduced my referral, requiring the disclosure of pay raises to Monroe County elected officials. And I'm asking for your unanimous support from this committee so that the full legislature may actually consider and enact this into law, as I believe it would. I'll spare you a quote from the actual referral. This referral is based on New York state law, which regulates and sets minimal common sense expectations for towns so that the citizens of these towns know what they're paying in their salary to their elected officials in any given year. This common sense practice works very well throughout Monroe County already. Clearly what is working is Mendon, Brighton, Irondequoit, Greece, Webster can also work for the county as a whole. I want to be very clear. This referral is not directed at any particular individual, nor will it have any effect on current salaries. It is simply the proper thing to do, and one which I know in our hearts has a lot of support in this room. And I ask you to support our county administration by giving it a process that already works in so many different municipalities throughout Monroe County and New York State as well. Finally, to quote the chair of the Agenda Charter Committee, when you so valiantly wrote and stood up for accountability in Monroe County nearly 20 years ago, quote, "This is more than a symbolic gesture. This is a commitment to integrity in government, and that is why I hope you'll join me in supporting this legislation." Those are your words too, and I think you were right to do that. I'm going to write this referral in that spirit. I do thank you for your time, and I thank this committee for listening, and I hope I truly hope you'll do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ms. Callie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple brief thoughts to give on this. I don't mean to be comical, but it is unusual that we have two referrals coming before us that are so similar. But in both of them, when I sat down to write some comments, the first thing that came to mind was, in both cases, which comes first, the chicken or the raise? I feel that as elected officials that we do have a responsibility. Elected and higher paid government officials has a responsibility for a transparency when it comes to salaries, especially in an era where the middle class is actually earning less than they did prior to 2008 in the recession. It's critical that we're transparent with raises as they come up prior to them being voted on. And I guess I will speak specifically to the 11th hour amendment to the past budget with the raise for the sheriff. It has nothing to do with whether or not the sheriff or anyone getting a raise on that day is deserving. Certainly, there are many people in this room that would argue that they are worth more than they're getting now and that the county clerk is getting more than whatever she makes now. But the point really is to deal with the trust that the public is asked to give us by electing us and by paying our salaries, that we need to be perfectly open with them when a raise is coming due, not waiting until the 11th hour of a budget amendment process to introduce it. Certainly, it backfired with the public. It was not received in a good light, and it shouldn't have been received in a good light. I think that the language of this referral speaks to that and takes us forward in a way that we can process raises, salary issues in a much more open way without hindering it. It just means that we do our due diligence and we let the public know when things are coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Mr. Esposito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank both sponsors of these referrals. I don't think it's any surprise that these referrals have come up in light of the raise that was voted for the sheriff at last month's or last year's budget meeting at the last minute without any notice. These referrals, both, and this one in particular, go to great lengths to ensure that that sort of thing doesn't happen again, that there is as much accountability and transparency and the issue of raises for elected officials as possible. This one in particular is modeled after New York State town law. The state has already decided that for all towns in New York State, the proper thing to do is to notice any potential pay increases for elected officials when the budget is noticed, specifically to prevent what we saw here in December, which was a last-minute raise for an elected official that no one knew anything about. Not only is that the right thing to do out of respect for the tax-paying public, the people that are paying the checks to us and other elected officials who might want or get raises, but it also has another practical implication that we also saw the negative side of last December. That is, by having notice and committee discussion about potential pay increases, we can avoid mistakes and find information out before they have harmful consequences. We're in the middle now of dealing with a pay increase for the sheriff that might be 3 times what this body thought it was actually approving, simply because people didn't do their homework properly to know exactly how much that increase was going to be. This referral and the one before it, which was unfortunately voted down for no reason that has been articulated in this committee, would prevent that in the future. That's what it seeks to do. That's why it's the right thing to do. I hope this committee will vote in favor of it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Esposito. Anything further? Take a vote on this matter. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. No.
2-3 fails. Referral 12-112, enact a local law, real property tax exemption for capital improvements to residential properties.
No, second by, or first, moved by Mr. Esposito, second by Ms. Callie. Anybody like to speak on this referral? Mr. Esposito?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to, again, thank you for the opportunity a few months ago to withdraw this referral at that time and bring it back now so that we can have the benefit of a few more months to learn about why this might be a benefit to the people we serve and to this county. This proposal, very simply, is a property tax exemption for homeowners who would make capital improvements to their home. It's a phased-in exemption over 8 years for up to $80,000 in increased assessed value, provided that there are certain limitations or requirements that are met, that there's at least $3,000 of capital expenditure made, that the improvement is made to a building that's at least 5 years older, that it's made to a 1 or 2 family home that's a primary residence for the person making the improvement, all of which I think have great benefit to obviously the people who might be making the improvements, to provide a little bit of property tax relief to those people, to prevent their taxes from going up any quicker than is absolutely necessary. But it also provide benefits to neighborhoods and municipalities through the improved home values. And finally, also provide an incentive to improve your home, so that it would provide a boost to the local home construction industry. I think these are significant benefits on issues that are very important this day and age. Obviously, we all struggle with overburdened property taxpayers, and something we talk about frequently in this body, in this chamber, and in our public. We've seen very stagnant home values for a number of years, despite several booms and busts in the housing market nationally. And the home construction industry has particularly been languishing for nearly 6-7 years now. So for those reasons, I would encourage my colleagues on this committee to vote in favor of this referral, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments about it at this time.
Mr. McCann.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Through you to Legislator Esposito. I thought I heard you say this was for a primary residence. I didn't see that in the language of the draft legislation. Could you point that out to me?
I misspoke. It's primarily 1 or 2 family residences. It doesn't have to be the owner's residence.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Mr. Howland.
Through you, Madam Chairwoman, realizing that this proposal was first introduced by former legislator Richard Beebe, a man I grew to respect during my 2 years of service with him, I have taken a close look at this proposal. However, even though I have respect for Mr. Beebe, in this instance, I do not agree with his conclusions. The conclusions suggested in this referral are that his tax incentive would help local property taxpayers improve their property and promote our local economy. First, however, there is no empirical evidence offered with this referral that shows this referral would create additional business for the home material stores or people in the home remodeling business. Where are the facts? Where's the backup? There is none. It is my belief that a person of lesser means who is forced to replace a leaking door or replace failed windows because he has to in order to protect the value of his properties will do so whether there is a tax exemption or not. I also believe a person of greater means who has the money to spend $80,000 upgrading a kitchen or a bath does not need a tax exemption to encourage him to do so. The real rub for me in this referral is that one only has to remember that when a tax exemption is given, what it really means is, yes, one person gets a tax break, but the actual tax burden itself is just shifted to be paid by other taxpayers. In this situation, the affluent homeowner's tax savings, approximately $3,200, would generally be shifted to people with a lower ability to pay, people who cannot afford an $80,000 home improvement. In plain language, under this plan, a rich person would be getting a larger tax break than a poor person, and those same relatively poor people would be expected to make up the difference for the rich person's tax break. Finally, we county legislators ourselves are trying to reduce the burden of unfunded mandates to our county taxpayers. Isn't it being disingenuous of us to place an unfunded mandate on our towns? Isn't it a fact that if town assessors were not able to keep up with the caseload or complete all of the new work entailed in this referral, then they would refer it to the county, who in turn would charge back the towns for doing this work? It's for these reasons I'll be voting against this referral.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. Further? Ms. Kelly at this time?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a couple thoughts to give on this, as well as some of the things that have been said at this point actually give me pause, but I will start off with my own thoughts on thinking outside of the box when it comes to community planning. Being a resident of the city of Rochester, I have been community active for a number of years, and that comes with its highlights and lowlights. But one of the highlights is being able to work with city government in trying to figure out and research ways that cause development, cause security, and instead of decline. And in that, you find yourself going to a number of lectures throughout the year that are given by people that live not inside Monroe County, but rather outside of New York State. These are large cities and counties that have thought outside the box to stop decline within their areas and to stabilize the tax base. There is no way that this is a tax burden on anyone. I could count on Philadelphia as one particular city. I'm sorry, I'm rambling right now, I admit, but this is something that requires people to think outside of property tax boxes. We allow tax breaks for businesses, some of which we never realize the fruit. And that has come under great scrutiny over the last year. This is an opportunity to spur development, and you may not find facts and figures on it because it's not been done yet. But it has been done in other cities, and we do have results from other cities that have solidified their downtown areas, making them safer, making them destinations, and it's something that is well worth trying here in Monroe County. No one has to put a big addition on their home, but I guarantee you that in talking with city owners, the idea of getting a tax break to some was, well, I wouldn't say I was doing it in the first place because I wouldn't trust that my taxes wouldn't go up. That's an off-the-cuff kind of statement. But the point is that when you go out into rural areas, you will find what I would call the tar paper phenomenon. The tar paper phenomenon is the phenomenon where someone in a rural area, and I own cottage property, where they finish their property to a point, but they don't quite finish it. And the reason they don't finish it is because when they finally put on that last clapboard, their property gets reassessed and their taxes go up. So this isn't something that's just in a city. It is something that happens in rural areas as well. And I can only say that this is thoughtful. It gives a payback in a reasonable amount of time, where other municipalities have done it over a 20-year period, guaranteeing that no one would move at that time that their tax breaks were happening, but still the payback was there. So I don't find this is not a tax burden if someone chooses not to take this up. It's not it's not a burden to anyone else. The only thing that there is the formula that gets plugged into the tax bills that does not overtax the person that's done the property and applied for it and gotten the permission to do it this way. So I would urge that you give it a second thought and pass it so this can come to the full legislature.
Mr. Esposito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank Legislator Howland and Legislator Kelly for their comments. This proposal has been one that's been discussed and introduced many times over the years, and I'm glad we're finally having this conversation. I, too, certainly have great respect for Legislator Beebe and Legislator Bronson before him, the previous sort of makers of this referral, if you will. And at no point when I've ever talked about or advocated for this referral have I said in of itself it's going to solve our property tax problem or our home value problem, or is it going to be the one thing that boosts our economy. However, I do think it will help, and I do have some numbers to back that up, and I appreciate you asking about that. To start, I would like to make a point that this is a state law that allows for this exemption to occur. It allows municipalities, cities, towns, villages, counties all over New York State to opt in if they'd like to do. Many have done that, many upstate counties, and also the city of Rochester. And in the city of Rochester, in the last 3 years alone, there's been almost 1,000 properties that have taken advantage of this exemption to improve their properties and to save hundreds of dollars in property taxes. By no means are we talking about the most high-end individuals who can afford maybe to put $8,000 into a kitchen, as you said. The average exemption is only $13,000, which is a pretty fair amount, which is about $260 in annual savings to city taxpayers. I think that extending that to the county in a place like Irondequoit, where we have the same sort of issue of stagnant home values, could be the difference that some people make, alluding to the tar paper syndrome that Legislator Cayley describes, to putting in money into their home or to not, if they're walking a fine line in tough economic times like we are right now, where they're worried about the property tax burden, which is already high in a place where home values have been stagnant for a very long time. And that stagnant home value is really the key to this referral and why I believe is different than other exemptions that this county and other municipalities offer. And I'll get to that in a minute. But in terms of numbers, I'd like to bring out a few more facts that I think speak very loudly as to why a referral like this is something we need in Monroe County. The U.S. Department of Census data, the Census Bureau, actually keeps track of permits pulled in counties and municipalities all across the United States for remodeling of single and two-family houses. And they keep them for Monroe County. Since 2003, which maybe we could talk about as probably being the peak of the most recent housing boom, to 2010, which would probably be about the bottom, even here locally where maybe we weren't affected as much, permits on remodeling work in Monroe County are down 64%. It's almost a third of the number of permits that are pulled in our towns and our region to improve their homes. That may be the confluence of a lot of different factors, but I have a feeling all of that economic activity is not being made up in other places. And to give you an example of how much economic activity that is, that equates, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, to about $170 million of less economic activity every year in Monroe County. That's pretty significant. That says to me that there's an industry here that is fighting a problem, and that while this particular referral might not solve it, with enough promotion and with the right sort of incentive, it could definitely help people put money back into their homes to get that industry back on track, to generate more revenues in sales tax and, oh mind you, property tax revenues eventually when the exemption runs out. So that's something I'd like to point out that I think is a very telling statistic. And sort of on the issue of why I think this exemption's a little bit different and doesn't shift the burden to other property taxpayers, like Mr. Holland alluded to, the way a lot of other property tax exemptions do. Because I will agree, and before I put this in, I thought long and hard about, we don't need more property tax exemptions. A lot of us are probably living in towns, or in the city of Rochester especially, where there's a lot of property exempt territory or properties already because of churches, education, governmental buildings. This one's a little bit different in that it does not reduce any of the existing tax base whatsoever. This is an exemption that simply phases in the increase in the tax base when people's homes' values increase through additional assessments. So there's no shifting of the tax burden by reducing county revenues. And I think that's a very important distinction. So it doesn't have the hit that it would have on other county property taxpayers, the way an exemption would be for maybe just a veteran or a disabled person who gets a property tax exemption by buying a house that didn't already have an exemption. That is a very important distinction. It's not a permanent exemption, which is also an important distinction. This is not taking a house off the tax rolls because somebody now says it's a home church and the state has given them permission to take it off the property tax rolls. This is a phased-in exemption. So over time, it still has the benefit of actually increasing the revenues to the county because someone has improved their home. We just don't see that increase as quickly, hopefully lessening the burden for the homeowner, which was what encouraged them to make the improvement to their home. And finally, I do believe that this can improve economic activity, which has ancillary benefits for a whole host of reasons that go above and beyond the revenues collected to the county If we want to talk about revenues, obviously there are sales tax revenue improvements, but also property tax increases to the municipalities that haven't opted into this. Which gets me to, I think, what is sort of the last point I'll make, and that is the impact on towns, because I have heard that before. I have heard that some town governments don't like this idea because they struggle on the ground floor with the difficulty of exempt properties in their municipality and how that affects other property taxpayers. First, let me be very clear. This does not impact the property taxes collected by towns. This is only an exemption to county property taxes. So that's something we should be very clear. There is going to be an additional burden on the permitting and assessment processes at town governments, because in our county they are the ones who do those things. When someone wants to pull a permit to put on a kitchen, they have to go to their town, and when someone wants to apply for a tax exemption, they have to apply to the town assessor. So I won't begrudge the fact that there is an additional burden on there, but I do believe that's minimal compared to the benefit that could be provided to homeowners and taxpayers, particularly when you think about the fact that New York State already allows for hundreds of exemptions that assessors have to take applications for and process. If this one should happen to be so successful that it created this huge burden on towns and having to put out more permits than they would have otherwise and accept more applications for exemptions, what that means is there's probably some kind of boom going on in their town that's going to benefit that town far more than the added staff burden of hiring perhaps an additional assessor or a different permit inspector. And so I think that can more than make up for itself in that way, and for that reason I think the sort of burden it might place on town bureaucracies is far outweighed by the benefit this could have on the economy and to property taxpayers and homeowners. And my final point, or maybe hopefully my final point, but we might get to more things, about the lack of facts and information that this committee has to consider, is one that I do want to express some frustration about. 2 months ago we sat here and I withdrew this referral because I wanted to have more time to get more information for this committee to consider. The next day, or the next week perhaps, maybe it went out, I sent 2 letters to the administration asking for their assessment on the impact that this referral might have to the revenues of the county, and also for some very basic public information about other types of exemptions that this county already administers. It's a month and a half later and I've still not received that. That makes it very frustrating for somebody like me that is trying to provide information and make a case for an exemption that I think is going to help my community, especially a place like Arundecoit, to not get that information. So I guess at this time I'd like to express my frustration and also ask through you, Madam Chair, if there is someone from the administration that might be able to weigh in on the letters I sent, on this referral at all, especially given the fact that it's not just been that month and a half since I sent those letters, but several months since Legislator Beebe introduced this referral to this committee, which was then sent to the administration for an opinion, which also hasn't happened. So while I do share your frustration sometimes about not having information to consider with these referrals, this is a case where I believe we could have taken the last few months to do a better job of that, and I'd like to try to get some more answers before we vote on this referral today. So I guess I'll reiterate my request, Madam Chair, to the administration for any information about this.
To the Chair, Scott Adair, the Director of Finance, and I am in receipt of, by way of direct mail, one copy of your letter, and then I also am, because the Real Property Tax Director also reports to me the copy of your other letter dated February 6th. And I have to apologize on the Real Property Tax one, because after the referral was pulled, it sat on my desk and I didn't pay attention to it, and it got buried underneath some other information. And then when the referral was pulled, I didn't look back at it to see that it was still a viable request at that point in time, and never reached out to determine whether or not that was something that needed to be followed up on until this week. Regarding the letter that you sent directly to me, regarding the analysis of this particular referral and what my opinion, I believe the exact words that you used were what my opinion of the implications of this referral were, and I had a long discussion, probably a year and a half to 2 years ago with Legislator Bronson at the point in time when this was originally submitted to the legislature, and we discussed the additional burden that you've talked about here this evening regarding the towns and the impact of the towns and the assessors in those towns. The couple things I would point out that in your last round of comments that I think could be misconstrued and could potentially even be incorrect. Part of the improvements that happen to houses is part of the assessed value growth that this county as well as the towns count on as part of their real property tax levy each year. And effectively, by putting an exemption on that growth, you would be hurting the tax revenues in this particular case with this referral for the county. In addition to that, you have the concept that the town assessors would now be required to handle documentation that really speaks to a subjective valuing, because it's not just as simple as getting receipts for $3,000 worth of additions to your home, but it's the market value and what that addition to the home actually improved it by. And so a taxpayer who has remodeled a kitchen for $3,000 would present that information to the assessor, and the assessor would then have to go back to them and say that this doesn't increase the market value of the home by $3,000, and thus there is no exemption here. It really gets into what I would refer to as this is an exemption that is extremely subjective, much more so than other exemptions that are out there. The other exemptions are out there that are, I'll just say, you provide a document and it's check the box and you get this percentage off on your property taxes. So it does create an additional burden of the assessor having to go out and complete additional work, but also having to deal with the subjectiveness of the valuation of this process. So there is an extremely additional effort put on the town assessors regarding this particular tax exemption in comparison to many of the other ones that the county currently or the towns currently participate in. And ultimately, I think as Legislator Holland pointed out, the towns could kick that back to the county and say, you know what, we're not going to administer this one. You guys need to, and thus we would then wind up having to add additional staff to administer this particular program, in addition to the fact that we would then more than likely, through a chargeback, wind up charging back each of those municipalities for that additional effort that we've put in. So it ultimately creates additional burden, whether it be on the town or the county, on the governmental unit that's subject to this referral or this exemption. From our standpoint, that was my opinion of why this referral did not necessarily provide the kind of economic boom that you suggested in your comments, and I think that this referral would ultimately create an additional burden, probably more so than the boom that you suggest in the discussion that you had.
You have more comments?
Thank you, Mr. Adair. I'd like to make some comments before we go on as a chair. I received 3 letters from the clerk's office with regards to this referral for the real property tax exemption, and one was from Robert Criddle from the town of Ogden as assessor, Leo Carroll from the town of Greece, assessor, and town supervisor John Moffett, who represents or is in my district. And I just wanted to let those be noted for the record, and they are available. They will be available for through the clerk's office that they did. They are opposed, but I thought that the one from Mr. Leo Carroll from the town of Greece was very well written, and he pointed out that for him it would be an overwhelming burden on him, and he felt that it would further erode the overall tax base to the benefit of a small percentage of homeowners. So he had some good points that he made in his office or in his letter to us as well. And I believe what you did say when you were talking in your last points is that the opting in of towns, and I think that for me that's a key thing, is that there is the option for towns to, through state law, to buy into this now, and based on that, I would be voting against this, but those will be available through the clerk's office. So I will now recognize Mr. Esposito, the maker of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And certainly the towns have that option. That's their right for their own property tax bill. But even if they were to opt in and think this is the right thing to do, county property taxpayers would still have to pay unless the county did that. So I think as our job as legislators elected to the county level, our focus should be on the county property taxpayers. And I believe this has benefits to them. I'd like to thank Legislator Adair, or excuse me, Mr. Adair, wrong Adair, sorry, for his answers. They sound very familiar. I know you've met with our office and previous legislators years ago on this. I understand there is a burden that would be put on assessors to handle applications like this. And of course I understand that this could reduce the potential revenue, increased revenue to the county in future years by providing an exemption. That's what an exemption is. But what I want to be very clear about is in no way would this reduce the property tax revenues or the property tax base as it currently exists for Monroe County. This is only talking about the increased tax base. It also is only a phase-in, which means it's not permanent. And as a result, this actually has the potential to increase the tax base, not only for county, but also for towns. And so I think it's short-sighted to say that this provides a burden to government workers and to town-level assessors and even potential chargebacks to this county to say that we can't handle that additional workload for something that might benefit property taxpayers and homeowners with that little bit of extra help to improve their homes, which is something we all know we need to do in this town or this area, particularly my district in Irondequoit, where the housing stock is aging and declining in value the last few years, let alone staying stagnant. So while I respect that there are difficulties with something like this, there always is with an exemption because it's potentially less revenue and potentially more work for someone like a town assessor. I think those burdens and that stress that might be put on a government bureaucracy is far outweighed by the benefits it could provide county property taxpayers. So thank you for your answers. I still would like, through you, Madam Chair, to request the administration to provide the other list, real property tax services. Regardless of the vote here today, this is an issue I think we should continue to discuss in some way, shape, and form because I think the issues of property taxes, home values, and certainly economic activity in our region are ones that we should continue to focus on, even if it's a small referral that might not be the magic silver bullet, but that might provide a little bit of benefit, which I believe this does. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Esposito. Would that be something that you could accommodate, Mr. Helfer?
Through the chair, we were working on that this afternoon. Unfortunately, could not pull it together in time to get it for tonight's committee meeting, but we can certainly have that information available shortly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adair. That'll be provided to Mr. Esposito. I believe Mr. McCann had his hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. Actually, Mr. Adair touched on a couple of the points I wanted to make. I would also like to point out for the record, you mentioned Greece assessor Leo Carroll had a letter. Mr. Carroll, in addition to being assessor, is also the head of the building department in the town of Greece. My knowledge of the growth in assessed valuation in Greece knows that the home improvements make up a significant portion of the growth that the town of Greece has seen over the last few years. New housing starts are down significantly, and there hasn't been that much new retail, so that the area of growth and assessed valuation that we're talking about actually makes a significant portion of it. I would just like to point out, and again, Mr. Adair hit on this, in my particular case, I live in a house that was built in 1982, and it's assessed at about $150,000. That house has the original kitchen and original bathrooms, and easily we could spend upwards of $30,000 in updates in all of those rooms. My concern with this proposal is people are going to be under the impression that that's going to lead to an exemption if they get that work done. And again, when it comes to the assessed valuation of your home, nothing is a guarantee, but my suspicion is that my house that's worth $150,000 today is going to be worth right around $150,000 tomorrow if we make those significant updates to those rooms. And again, I think a lot of people are going to be under the impression, I've spent all this money, therefore I'm entitled to an exemption. So I think it could lead to confusion on the part of people. One other point I would like to mention, a big concern that I have about this proposal is there's nothing in the law that says that the home has to be owner-occupied. There's no minimum time requirement for someone owning a property to receive the exemption. There's no requirement to repay an exemption if someone sells the property within a year or two of getting that exemption. And one concern I have is that this, in my opinion, could possibly undermine home ownership in certain neighborhoods. You know, right now I'm familiar of, as I'm sure we all are, areas of the county where neighborhoods are seeing more and more of an increase in rental properties. And I think a lot of people who are investors who are looking at purchasing and converting these properties and possibly doing rehabs to these properties could end up taking advantage of this property. And again, if they do make improvements that do lead to an increase in assessed valuation, it very well could undermine that whole home ownership issue, which I think would be detrimental to our neighborhood. So for those reasons, I will not be supporting this.
Thank you. Ms. Callie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to beleaguer any more or spend too much more time on it, but I do have a couple more thoughts. I think I would like, we've already heard 2 no votes. I would like to ask you to pause for a moment, and before you cast those no votes, to actually think about some of the positive ways that this can affect ownership of properties within Monroe County. I think some things are missing. Certainly living in the city and knowing that we have tax abatements, what Legislator McCann has brought up hasn't really been the issue there, and they've actually kept people in their homes versus moving out. The question here is growth, and any time that we start to grow, there's always going to be some pushback. I realize that this will add some additional work, as pointed out by Mr. Adair, but again, the choice is growth here, or doing things the same way that we've done them in the past. And one thing that did come to mind is, well, I'm going to point out one thing. First, there's not going to be a deluge. When this passes, there will not be a deluge of people lining up to get a tax exemption for that $80,000 kitchen that they want to put in. It's not going to be the case. This will be a slow process, and any additional work would be a slow rise in that work. And most of the due diligence will be done in the beginning, figuring out their process if the town opts into doing it. But I will point out one more thing, and this comes from a social aspect. Aside from a few people in this room, I'm thinking most of us in here are over 40, and what we're finding is a different phenomenon, and that is the phenomenon of the nuclear family trying to stay together, or the parents of a family coming back into the home. This particular tax abatement makes it more amiable for a family that is looking to keep their parents in their home, or for their parents to stay in their home. To stay in a home, certainly a two-story home, as people age out or age in to restricted movement, requires changes within their home. This particular referral actually speaks to that without spelling it out. I think that we need to give our residents and our taxpayers a little bit of credit in planning forward and trying to make changes to stay within their homes, their neighborhoods, and their specific communities without moving, if they didn't want to a more physically able setup within their home. And so this does speak to other social issues that we are seeing happening, and not in the city alone, but in the county, countywide, rural and city, that people are wishing to stay where they are, and that sometimes it takes more money to put into that home to allow them to stay where they are. And then you have that idea that I can't afford to do this. Well, I can't do that, therefore I won't do that. I got to leave. It's a bit dramatic, but I think that we all know some people that have made those choices. And if this tax abatement referral passes, that allows families in this county to make some choices that they might not otherwise feel that they were able to make. So I think going forward, don't think of this as a kitchen. Think of this as an in-law apartment. Think of this as the addition to the facilities that an aging adult might need to stay within their home and not leave what they're comfortable with and go into either assisted living or a nursing home or a different community altogether. And so just take a moment and think about this in a different way before you say no or yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Howland.
Madam Chairwoman, it is interesting to think about it in a different way, and I would like to take a moment for all of us to think of it in a different way. I think we've all agreed that the tax burden for our citizens is too high and something needs to be done about it. But if you could imagine for a moment that the floor of this legislature is the county of Monroe, and the people on that side of the aisle are the ones that have received, say just this year in 2012, $10,000 in tax exemptions. And the people on this side of the aisle are the people that have to make up that difference, because we all know costs go up. We have to pay more for government every year. I don't have to tell you about health care. I don't have to tell you about retirement. But it's been said that there would be no shift in tax burden. But that tax burden of monies not collected would be shifted to these people. And I think if you stopped and asked these people, do you think you're paying enough taxes? Do you think you'll be able to stay in your home if taxes go up because other people don't have to pay? I think you'd get a completely different answer. And for me, it's a matter of fairness. Yes, I would like to see families stay together. I'd like to see mothers and fathers live with their children and not have to move out. But I'd also like to see the people on this side, the people that are paying those extra taxes, be able to stay in their homes also. And sometimes just that little bit does make the difference. So for me, it's a matter of fairness, and that's why I'll vote against it.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. Mr. Esposito, can we make this the last question? Because I know we got another committee coming in, so I want to be conscious of the.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone. This has been, I think, a productive discussion. I'd like to thank Legislator McCann. He raises two very good points. I think that are things that haven't been discussed much. And I'd just like to address them because while I think they're good points, I don't necessarily think they're reasons to vote against the referral. The first one about the concern about not having it be owner-occupied homes. I think that's a good suggestion. I would be willing to live with that kind of limitation to start on an exemption like this because I think promoting home ownership is a good thing. However, you may or may not be aware that the state law that allows for this opt-in, while it does provide some flexibility in the rates of the exemptions, I don't believe it provides flexibility in terms of the requirements you can impose. So that's not something I think we could even amend this referral to include. But that being said, I don't necessarily think it's a harmful thing to not have it in there, not because I think it will promote landlords' use, but where there are places like in the city and growingly in Irondequoit where landlords and non-owner occupants are becoming an issue, I think the biggest problem is when they don't make improvements to homes. I'd be happy to have some landlords in Irondequoit take advantage of an exemption like this and improve their homes if it meant they got a small exemption and it didn't let those homes go into disrepair, which is the bigger problem I think we usually find when there's lack of owner occupancy. So for that reason, I don't think this should be a criteria that would require you to vote against this referral. The other one about the confusion about people who would expect that every dollar they put into their home they would get back when we all know that's not how assessed valuation works, is still no loss. You still have added economic activity, and not that I want to trick people into spending money and improving their homes, but there's no downside to that. If people apply and they have no increase in their assessment, they would simply be rejected for this particular exemption, and they wouldn't have a huge property tax spike, which is what we really want to prevent and which is what I believe keeps some people apprehensive about making improvements to their home. So again, I think those are very good points. I'm glad you raised them. I just don't believe they necessarily mean you have to vote against a referral like this, since I don't think either have a negative impact on homeowners and property taxpayers. But having said that, I think I've made the points I'd like to make, and while I would hope in the future we have better pre-committee communication among legislators in this committee and the administration and others that want to weigh in on issues, I thank the chair for her time on this issue, and certainly encourage, I think, the one person that hasn't declared how they're going to vote in favor.
At this time, we'll call the vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No.
2-3 fails.
Okay, is there any unfinished business at this time? Hearing none, then we'll adjourn this meeting. There'll be, which will be on April the 23rd. Thank you.